and an aspiring botanist. So I was inspired by the pioneer naturalist when I was a child, and I've embarked on many biodiversity related projects, and also known as now the plant doctor. My main interests lie in biodiversity, plants, and youth. Ultimately, I hope to create a better world for all. Before we start our discussions, I would like everyone to switch on their videos for a short photo taking session. So everybody can switch on their videos, show your big smiles for the session later.
Everyone looks good. Ready? 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Okay, so now to kickstart session A, we have with us Karen. Her presentation today is titled Chasing Spawn, which will focus on understanding coral spawning in Singapore and how the yearly spawning event gives us hope for sustaining coral reefs in the face of climate change.
Sorry, I was muted, wasn't I?
Yeah, you were muted.
No wonder you couldn't hear me.
Yeah, no, now we can hear you loud and clear.
Great. Thank you very much, Waikit, for that introduction, and a very good afternoon to everyone. It's really heartening for me to see so many youth from the region coming together to address some of the biggest challenges in wildlife management and conservation. You guys are the future, so really happy to see you here. So for today, I will be sharing about a rarely observed phenomenon that I personally find very fascinating, but more importantly, from an ecosystem restoration perspective. It is an important process that can be harnessed to enhance assisted restoration efforts. Now, this phenomenon, which scientists have identified as multi-specific or mass coral spawning, when corals of different species spawn synchronously, and it occurs on reefs all over the world, including the reefs in Singapore. Now, although mass coral spawning was only discovered in 1984, it's probably an event that has been occurring for thousands of years, but only recently through the advent of scuba diving that allowed marine scientists to really go underwater and understand this in more detail. The primal urge to reproduce, it's universal, terrestrial and marine. But for corals to make a completely new and genetically unique offspring, all corals have to go through several basic steps. The first one, the gametes or the sperm and eggs, they need to be produced. And this occurs within the coral animal called a polyp, housed within the coral colony. Next, these gametes need to be released into the water column from the parent colony, after which the gametes must combine in the process of fertilization and form a planulae, which is essentially a juvenile coral polyp. And finally, when the planulae finds a suitable surface to settle, it will deposit a calcium carbonate skeleton and start a process of building a completely new coral colony. Now, when you talk about coral sexuality, they actually exhibit two modes of sexuality. They can either be hermaphroditic, where individuals produce both male and female gametes and release them at the same time, either in bundles or individually, or they could be gonochoric, where individuals only produce either male or female gametes. Now, after the gametes are produced, they are released or they spawn, and this can occur in actually two ways. The first one is through brooding, where sperm is released into the water column. It arrives at, a polyp fertilizes the egg internally, and the coral releases fully formed coral planulae, and they're competent by the time they're released into the water column, complete with a zooxanthellae, which is a microscopic algae that lives in the tissue of the corals and photosynthesizes. And once they're released, they're almost ready to settle immediately. The other strategy is through broadcasting, as you can see here in the picture, where both sperm and eggs are released into the water separately on eggs, as we discussed in the previous slide. Now, brooders may breed more than once a year, and there are some species that have been recorded to brood almost every month, but spawners in general only breed once a year during the mass coral spawning events. And of course, there are exceptions to this rule, but in general, you either have brooders or spawners within the whole coral community. Now, prior to 1984, scientists thought that most corals are only brooders. Then after the mass coral spawning event was observed, this scientific thinking shifted. So now we know, based on data and literature, that over 90% of coral species are potentially spawners, which is an important aspect because that means we know the major strategy and we can do something to harness the potential of this strategy. But scientists back then also hypothesized that mass coral spawning could not occur on equatorial reefs because at that time they felt that equatorial reefs did not experience the large environmental fluctuations compared to reefs located in a higher and lower latitudes, not and south of the equator, that they felt is necessary to trigger this spawning events. Now, that belief was actually held all the way to about the 2000s when a PhD student by the name of Dr. James Guest, now Dr. James Guest, investigated the phenomenon on tropical reefs. And in the process, he managed to debunk that thinking by documenting the occurrence of mass coral spawning, also known more by its more technical term, multi-specific synchronous coral spawning, on an equatorial reef right here in Singapore when he published his 2002 paper. And since then, James has gone on to document mass spawning in other tropical reefs in the world, in the Red Sea, in Malaysia, and he has continued to focus a lot of his work on coral reproduction. And if you're interested to find out more about James's work, there's a link below. You can maybe follow that later on if you want to see the kind of work he's doing, including some exciting work in Palau at the moment. So now with this better understanding that we have of broadcast spawning, we can also better appreciate their reproductive strategy and why it is important for the survival of coral reefs in general. Now, the first reason really is predator saturation. This strategy ensures that gametes are released in a short time, and when they are released together in a short time, predators can only eat a very small amount of them, allowing many of them to float on and survive and colonize new areas. The second strategy really is the sheer number of gametes that are produced in the water column actually increases the fertilization success. So higher chance of male and female gametes of the same species to meet and fertilize. And that, of course, increases the reproduction success. Thirdly, it also increases the chance of genetic diversity. When you have many individuals of a single species spawn simultaneously, there's a greater possibility that many genetic combinations can occur from a single coral species, and that, of course, increases diversity. And this is really important for corals because they don't move, and because they don't move, they require strategies like this to increase the chance of fertilization and genetic diversity. Fourthly, it also allows corals to increase resilience. Now, with greater genetic diversity, there's also a greater chance that at least some of these new corals have genetic combinations that will help them survive the changing environmental conditions, for example, increased sea surface temperatures. And lastly, broadcast spawning increases the coral's dispersal range. Ocean currents can carry gametes long distances and sometimes establish coral colonies in areas that are far from the source. Now, okay, having learned more about mass coral spawning events in Singapore and why it is important, I guess the question might be, what is NParks doing then to ensure that such events can continue to occur? So in essence, the question is, how does NParks' broader conservation strategy help to ensure that our coral reefs continue to flourish and corals continue to spawn? Well, to answer this question, we really have to look at the big picture, the Nature Conservation Master Plan, or NCMP, which is a holistic plan that was launched in 2015 and in which charts the course of NParks' contemporary and future biodiversity conservation efforts. Now, the NCMP aims to systematically consolidate, coordinate, strengthen, and intensify the biodiversity conservation efforts, and it focuses on four main thrusts, as you can see here: conservation of key habitats, habitat enhancement, restoration, applied research, and importantly, community stewardship in nature. But specifically for the marine environment, we have the Marine Conservation Action Plan, or MCAP, which was also launched in 2015, and it takes reference from the Nature Conservation Master Plan, and it encapsulates NParks' efforts to conserve Singapore's marine biodiversity. And similar to the 4 trusts under the NCMP, the MCAP focuses on conservation of key marine habitats like those within the Sisters Island Marine Park, Singapore's first marine park. We also have various habitat enhancement, restoration, and species recovery programs through in-house projects, as well as through projects and collaborations with our academic partners. Research and monitoring programs, again, through projects in-house as well as in collaboration with our academic partners. And some of these also include opportunities for members of public to participate in. And finally, outreach and education programs, many of which are in partnership with stakeholders like Friends of Marine Park. I think some of you guys are here, which also has a very strong citizen science slant. Now, this year, in collaboration with our research partners at the St. John's Island Marine Lab, we are exploring the feasibility of doing a small-scale pilot to test the approach of harvesting coral spawn, rearing them in situ pens or ex situ in a lab facility, and then using the fertilized larvae to seed them directly onto substrate. Now, this research in this paper that you see here was just published in December 2021. It was done by a research team from Australia, and this research was tested out in Australia and in the Philippines. And as you can see in the last picture on your bottom right, that was a bare reef. Through the seeding, it actually increased the colonization by many, many folds. Now, of course, we don't know if this will work in our challenging marine environment. Issues like turbidity can be something that could impede some of this, but we are willing to give this a try. And if it works, then it will add a variety of strategy to the coral reef restoration toolbox that we have, that includes species-specific coral species recovery programs. Well, and so I will end here. And before I end, just a little reminder by one of the most beloved ocean advocate, Dr. Sylvia Earle, on why efforts that we make now to protect our planet's blue lung is so important, not just for the marine environment, but generally for the entire planet. Because really, if there's no blue, there's no green. We will not be here without the marine environment. And I hope you guys will be interested to do work in the marine environment and continue some of the good work that's being done around the world. And with that, I thank you.
Oh, so thank you, Karen. I really love that talk about, how corals have, such unique reproductive strategies, especially in the marine environment. So we will now welcome Dr. Rahayu Sukri. Her talk will be on the Bornean heath and peat swamp forests, also known as karangas or karapas in Bahasa, that are of high conservation value ecosystems which are rapidly being degraded by anthropogenic disturbances. The talk will focus on 2 case studies of ecological restoration of these degraded heath and peat swamp forests in Brunei Darussalam. Dr. Rahayu Sukri, please.
Thank you very much. Can I confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction and also for the invitation to talk today. I am happy to share with you some research that we're doing in UBD on restoration and the restoration of heath and peat swamp forests in Brunei. So a little bit about peat swamps and heath forests first in Brunei. As you can see from the map here, the peat swamps that you find in Brunei in purple are our second most extensive forest type in Brunei Darussalam. We also have small areas of heath forest. If you don't know what they look like, these are some examples of what the peat swamp on the left and heath forests look like. So you can see that the heath forests are actually quite dry. They exist on nutrient-poor sandy soils, whereas the peat swamps exist on peat, which is undecomposed plant matter, basically. What's unique about the peat swamps is they are able to support these big trees, and often these are of a single species called Sharia albida, which I'll talk more about as we go on with the talk. These forests are high conservation value. you can see two examples of important species that we find in Brunei's peat and heath forest here. These are also Bornean endemics, and so this clearly illustrates the importance of conservation of these forests as well. So moving on to rehabilitation and restoration programs in Brunei. These have been going on for quite some time as well in Brunei, but it's been mainly through these various tree planting programs by schools or organizations and so on. But in the last few years, these programs have seen a more concerted effort, particularly driven by the Forestry Department, and especially in support of our newly launched National Climate Change Policy, where the strategy 2 is to increase our forest cover through this afforestation and reforestation program. So we actually have a national target of planting 500,000 trees in Brunei by 2035. And this is spearheaded by the Forestry Department. So what UBD, and particularly my research institute, the Institute for Biodiversity and Environmental Research at UBD, has been doing is that we've been engaging with Forestry Department in support of this particular strategy 2, through science-driven research. So today, as mentioned by the moderator, I will be sharing with you on 2 case studies that we're doing at UBD in terms of restoration of these forests. The first one is a case study, a small pilot project that we're conducting in the Lumut area of Brunei. So this is what, I'm sure you know, this is what Brunei looks like. And we've been focusing on this area where you can see the triangle area. Here is basically a water pipelines running through both sides where they are supplying water to the gas and oil industry in Blyth. This is actually an area where one of our biggest peat dome is located in Brunei, the Batas Peat Dome. And this case study focuses on reforestation of degraded karapa, which is a type of heath forest, but it is located on waterlogged soils. So instead of dry soils, you can see a bit of the water pipeline here. And what happened was near the water pipeline, an area was cleared that was intended as a fire break. But of course, because the area has peat soils, the fire break does not work. It will still be flammable. So what we did was we were engaged in 2014 in order to try to rehabilitate this area. This is the picture of the site when we first came in, and you can clearly see that the area did not, unfortunately, regenerate naturally. Most of it was covered by thick grasses as well as these ferns. So what we did was we engaged with our partners from the Forestry Department and selected several native species that we can find in Brunei. You can see these ones here. The 4 species here are actually specialists of heath and peat swamp forest. The last one here is specialist of a mixed triple forest, but it was recommended to us because the Forestry Department have seen success in other programs with it. So this was a youth-driven project and a long-term project for us at UBD. It was led in 2014 by my former master student, Ms. Wardah here. She's now working as my research assistant and still actually working on this particular project as well. So what we did in 2014 was we initially cleared the area of all the grasses and ferns, and we planted these saplings of the 5 native species. They were about 1 meter tall when we planted them out, and we've been conducting regular monitoring twice a year in order to monitor their growth and survival. So what did we find? In the first 20 months after the initial planting, we found that the peat swamp specialist, Drybanops rapa, was the one that survived very well. So it maintained very high survival rates. As we predicted, we found that the mixed tetracarp specialist, Shorae rubra, did not survive well. So it basically died off after the first 5 months of the study. And this actually clearly indicated to us that when we do reforestation programs, we do have to take into consideration the habitat specialization of the species that we're planting. The 2 other species also survived quite well, so we were quite happy with that. So what happened in the long term? After 5 years later, in our census in 2020, you can see that Shorae albida Drybanops rapa still maintained very high survival. It's still our most successful species. The other 2 dipterocarp species similarly survived quite well. But unfortunately, the tropical conifer, Agathis borneensis, started to experience high mortality in the last few years. And this was because we had problems with termite infestations of this particular species. So through this, we've been able to recommend to the forestry department to not use Agathis borneensis when they are reforesting areas that are waterlogged. So that was actually quite an important finding for us. So you may wonder what they look like now. These are pictures of our two of the species. This is Shorea albida, and this is Darwinops rapa, and this is Shorea albida. So they have grown quite significantly from those 1 meter saplings that you see. They're now small trees. Our tallest are now about 12 meters, and the area is getting quite a nice close canopy now. So we're very, very happy with this project as well. So I'll move on to the second project that I'd like to share with you, which is the Badas tree planting project. This was a project that we started quite recently, and we've been working with several collaborators from Singapore as well, from SMART and from NTU. You can see that we focus also on the Badas peat dome here, but instead of the Lumut site, we now move to the Badas site, where we have the Shorea albida dominated peat swamps. The area often experiences regular forest fires, so it's quite degraded. So what we wanted to do was, instead of using different species, we wanted to focus on just the Shorea albida as a planting species here. And we were fortunate enough that our partners, our collaborators from SMART, were able to collect seeds of Shorea albida, because Shorea albida does not fruit regularly. The last fruiting in Brunei was actually in 2014, which was when our SMART collaborators collected the fruits. So these fruits were then, these are the flowers, the fruits were then reared in nurseries, and these are the saplings that we were able to plant out at the site. So this was a very big project that we had a lot of stakeholders on, and we wanted to have a bigger focus. So we had 4 main aims, of course, on the research and reforestation aspects, but we also wanted to directly contribute to Brunei's climate change action. And importantly, we wanted to engage the wider public and raise awareness, particularly about the Badas peat swamp forest, because not a lot of people in Brunei are aware of the importance of the peat swamps. There's increasing awareness, but we would like to see more. So for this particular aim, we've been engaging with members of the public, so that we are inviting them as volunteers in order to help us with measuring and collecting data from the project site. So what does our project look like? So you can see it's actually quite a big area, planting area here. And we planted out 200 saplings of Shorea albida. We did this last year when Brunei had a big break from COVID, and we were able to go out and do this field work. So we planted them out in late February, early March last year. We have 2 treatments, fertilizer and weeding treatments, and we've been conducting post-planting activities, which is when we go out with our youth volunteers in particular, and they help us with measuring and collecting data from the project site. So we've done this after the 1st month, the 3rd month, the 6th month. Now we're actually in the process of organizing the 12 months collection data. So some pictures of our volunteers and our project site. So you can see here some examples of what the site looks like. Very challenging, especially during the the wet season, where you can get completely wet or even completely submerged in the peat swamps. But that's actually been a big attraction with our volunteers, particularly our youth volunteers. They're very excited to be able to experience firsthand what the peat swamps are like. We've been able to work closely with the forestry department as well. And in fact, the director of forestry helped us launch the project back last year. So you can see here a lot more pictures of our happy volunteers. Despite the challenging situation, everybody always maintain good moods during this. And I think to date, we've been able to engage about 200 volunteers, which comprise of students from UBD, for example, from other education institutions in Brunei, also from our project partners. and also members of the public. So a lot of our volunteers don't actually have any biodiversity or even any science background, but they were interested in experiencing firsthand, particularly the peat swamps. And all of the feedback that we've gotten is that they've been able to get a lot of awareness about these peat swamps that they didn't know before. And they've been sharing that awareness with others in their family, their friends, and so on. And we do have a lot of returning volunteers. But unfortunately, because of COVID, for our 12 months collection, which we'll be doing next week, we won't be able to take in any volunteers. So we're hoping that in the second year of the project, we'll be able to reinstate the volunteering program again. Okay, so some preliminary results from our work in Badas. So far, up to the 6 months mark, we've not been seeing much difference between the weeding and no weeding treatment and between the fertilizer and no fertilizer treatment. But it's early days yet, and this is meant to be a long-running project that we will continue to monitor for several years. However, we've seen good signs of leaf production for most of the saplings that we've planted out. So this is a good sign because you can clearly see that the Sexuality albida saplings are happy. They are able to now divert their resources instead of maintaining survival. They've been now able to divert their resources into new growth. So far, we've had good survival, about 56.6% after 6 months. And next week, when we go out to the field again, we'll be conducting some replacement planting so that we can increase the survival further. So if you're interested to find out more about the Badas tree planting project in particular, you can visit our website here. And in this website, we share with you what's happening in Badas, particularly on the Badas tree planting, but also we have included some general information on peat rehabilitation, forest fire awareness, and so on. We also have an IG, which we share activities, research activities in particular, on not just the Badas peat swamp project or the Badas tree planting project, but also on other peat swamp related projects that we're doing in Brunei through the Institute for Biodiversity. So you're welcome to check this out as well. Okay, so and lastly, I'd like to say a very, very big thank you to particularly all the team members, the research team. You can see here, these are members of my research team, all very, very happy, all very youth driven, which is a very big component of these activities, and also to our project partners and stakeholders. And thank you as well to you for listening to my talk today.
Thank you, Dr. Rahayu Sukri. It was a very fascinating talk on the peat swamp forest, and one of our participants in the chat mentioned how fun they are to walk on. So looking forward to asking questions later. So now we will welcome Dr. Pasikolan. Her talk will be on the following. When pursuing urban ecosystem restoration, one needs to consider the previous natural state of the area as a reference and determine how it was altered. Working on a relic such as urban green spaces could be the focus for ecological restoration and rehabilitation, and determining the remnant biodiversity and their ecological requirements for survival in an urban setting. Dr. Pasikolan, please.
Good afternoon. My presentation is about the freshwater ecosystem restoration in urban and peri-urban setting in the Philippines. Consistent to the objectives of this virtual symposium, my talk aims to inspire the creative juices of the youth who are in attendance today and encourage them to come up with concrete ways to contribute to ecosystem restoration in their localities. There is always a question that is raised as to what happens when urbanization changes the relic or formerly pristine condition of a given ecosystem. As defined, ecosystem restoration is the process of reversing the degradation of ecosystems such as landscapes, lakes, seas, and oceans to regain ecological functionality and provide ecosystem services and meet the needs of the society, be it in regulating, provisioning, or cultural services, ecosystem restoration can be done by arresting the causes of the degradation and allowing natural regeneration. I will be focusing on the Laguna Lake and the rivers that drain into the Laguna Lake. Bordering the Metro Manila, Laguna and the provinces of Rizal is the large Laguna Lake or Laguna de Bay with a surface area of 949 square kilometers with an average depth of 2.8 meters. It is the source of livelihood of about 13,000 fisher folks and provide about 90,000 to 100,000 metric tons of fish per year. The rivers that drain into the lake include the Pagsanhan River, Santa Cruz River, and the rest include Marikina, Mangangate, Tunasan, San Pedro, Cabuyao, and San Cristobal rivers. Waters from Laguna Lake outflows in Pasig River and drains to Manila Bay. Now, principle number 1 of ecological principle. Everything is connected to everything else. Thus, whatever we do in a given ecosystem would surely affect the ecosystem components and their functional relationships. The living components, the flora and the fauna, and their functional affects and is affected by the abiotic components such as air, temperature, land, and water quality. Interspecies relationships provided dependencies. These relationships check and balance our life support system. Now, as we discuss ecosystem restoration, some questions such as this are often raised. What is it that needs to be restored? What is the present condition of the relic or remnant ecosystem? And what are the initial steps that a conservation group could do to contribute to the restoration of a given ecosystem? I emphasize here, start them young, and this is very appropriate in our celebration of the World Wildlife Day. Start them young. Let me tell you for 30 seconds a story about myself. I was once young. Now I'm young at heart, though retired. I was then about to enter high school when I was so fascinated with wildlife, birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, and their functional relationship. I always ask myself, where do these animals live and what do they need in order to survive? Can the birds survive in the city? What do fruit-eating and grain-eating birds eat in the city? On that background, I took up Bachelor of Science in Biology, then later pursued Masters in Wildlife Management, then later PhD in Environmental Science so that I could significantly contribute to the conservation of natural resources. I tell you, it is one fulfilling career. Something that I enjoyed doing and at the same time get paid for it. In this talk, I will specially highlight the activities in the freshwater bodies in peri-urban setting insofar as freshwater ecosystem restoration is concerned. In this slide, this is the Clear Youth Ecological Camp. In 2004, the Clear Partnership composed of Laguna Lake Development Authority, Unilever Philippines, and my NGO organization, the Society for the Conservation of Philippine Wetlands, was organized with a mission to safeguard the ecological integrity of Laguna de Bay. Our objective was to communicate the importance of the lake to the youth and for the youth to take action for its conservation. Thus, we designed the Youth Ecological Camp. CLEAR means conservation of Laguna de Bay's environment and resources. All right. And this ecological camp aims to increase the awareness of the youth and to secure their commitment to responsible river and lake wetland stewardship. It's a 3-day experiential-based learning curriculum. And then it was modified into 1.5 days virtual curriculum tested during the pandemic times. That was last November 4 and 5, 2021. This ecological camp has covered so far more than 100 high schools in Laguna de Bay area, with the youth network numbering to more than 1,000. All high school along Laguna Lake implemented community-based wetland conservation projects. This was during the pandemic times. All high school along this implemented this community-based conservation project. And this was replicated in 9 other wetlands in the country, in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And this is how it is. The Clear Youth Ecological Camp. It's in a virtual platform last November 4 and 5, 2021. Aside from doing Youth Ecological Camp and also Youth Network Congress, we thought of having sustainability plan so that the continuity is assured, so that the Society for the Conservation of Philippine Wetlands publish a manual for conducting youth ecological camp. It could be used by anyone. I can share the manual to you. We conducted training for trainers so that the expansion of this training camp will be increased. And then EcoCamp institutionalized in local government units, such as in the municipality of Mabitac. It allocates budget every year for EcoCamp. And then the partners, the Unilever, LLDA, and DNR provide support. So this is insofar as the youth ecological camps and youth Clear Youth Network Congress. Now the third activity is the Wetlands Bioblitz. The Wetlands Bioblitz is effective as citizen science method and the SEPA strategy. SEPA stands for Communication, Education, Participation, and Awareness. It's a strategy which increases awareness, scientific literacy, and engagement of local communities in wetland conservation. Among the specific outputs of this Wetland Bioblitz include the rapid assessment on wetland ecosystem services, or RAWES, data on water quality, hydrology, fauna, particularly avifauna, and then flora. The participants determine the ecological requirements of the flora and fauna for their survival and the restoration of ecosystem where they are in. All right, these photos are some of the activities during the BioBlitz, and the officers and the resource persons are here. Yours truly, and then the executive officer of the Society for the Conservation of Philippine Wetlands, a representative from ACB, representative from Biodiversity Management Bureau, and other organizations. Okay, and we intend to promote this to other localities as well, where there are wetlands and where there are freshwater bodies that needs restoration. That ends my short talk about wetland restoration. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pasikolan. After hearing about the diversity of ecosystem restoration efforts from our invited speakers, it is now time for our panel discussion. Thank you to everyone in the audience who submitted their questions. We will try to answer as many questions as possible during the panel discussion. Let us invite Karen and Dr. Rahayu Sukri back, please. So I think just to start the panel discussion, I'd like to ask Karen, maybe how can laypersons or the public, like diverse or even indigenous communities in Singapore, such as the Orang Laut, be involved in a coral restoration project or any blue marine conservation project?
Thanks, Carl, for that question. That's a really good question. And in fact, coral restoration as a process is actually a very simple process. In many parts of the region, there's actually quite a lot of work that's going on in the Philippines, in Indonesia. There are quite a number of community-based projects that looks at rehabilitating damaged areas using very simple techniques. It's almost like gardening. You take a coral, you break it up into a small piece, you let it grow larger, and then you move it out. So that's the approach that the many groups are using because it's the easiest way. You cultivate corals from fragments of existing corals, and then as they go bigger, you put it out. And communities can get involved in that. I think in some countries, in some areas, dive operators, schools are involved in that program. So at the most basic level, this is where the community can come in. Divers are a very important source of information. Through a lot of divers, we actually get information like which reefs spawn, for example, and that adds to the global database for coral spawning that's being maintained by some academics in Australia. And that forms a very important source of information when we want to talk about management strategy. So if you're a diver, if you see something interesting on the reef, report it, that data gets collected. So there are many opportunities and avenues. For those in Singapore, if you're interested, you can check out the NParks website for volunteer opportunities, as well as the many small groups who run similar programs for the community.
Wow, thank you, Karen. Yeah, thank you for the answer. Maybe I should go apply for my advanced open water diving license.
I think you should.
Yeah, and help out with the coral restoration efforts in Singapore.
Please
So
do that.
now maybe I'll turn to Dr. Rahel Supri. Since now that we're in this pandemic, I was just wondering, did COVID push back your restoration projects significantly? And were there like any funding and manpower delays that were detrimental to your project's progress?
Okay, thank you, Carl, for the question. Very good question. It was honestly very challenging for us in view of COVID. We actually started talking to our key partners on the project back in 2019, actually, before COVID even hit. So we had plans to actually start the restoration work particularly in Badas in 2020. But of course, by then COVID hit, so we had to push things back. We were able to secure funding from Brunei Shell Petroleum as well as from UBD and funding from SMART in order to conduct the restoration project in Badas. In terms of funding, so obviously what we planned at the start in 2019 funding-wise did not take into account COVID. So we had to move things around in terms of, making sure that there were allocations for health and safety aspects and things like that. But we pushed through. I think a lot of credit goes to my team. My research assistants were all youth who are very, they would say that they're no longer young, but I think they're still young. So I would say a lot of credit goes to them because they were able to be very proactive in finding solutions to the problems that we're facing with COVID. And we managed to go ahead. But thankfully, we had that brief lull when Brunei had no cases for about a year. So we were able to do the project as planned then. But as I mentioned at the talk, we then got hit with COVID, but we still persevered. The team still wanted to go out and do the work, even if it's just the research team doing it. So the only unfortunate side effect of that is that we've not been able to bring in the volunteers who clearly very much enjoyed being out in the site with the team. So yeah, so a lot of challenges, but I think the important thing here is to ensure that despite these challenges, we still find ways and solutions to be able to move forward with these restoration projects.
Exactly, COVID, though it's a very serious pandemic, should not stop, the fight against global biodiversity loss. And I'm definitely very inspired by that your team was able to push through this hard time. So maybe I'll move on to Dr. Pasikolan. As an organizer of many youth camps, which certainly inspired the young people in this room during COVID, maybe I'd like to ask, what was your greatest takeaway from involving young people in your project?
Okay, we have to start them young, and it should not stop. COVID or pandemic should not stop us from inspiring them. So we have to be creative in how to continue our eco camps and sustain their enthusiasm and interest in so far as wetland restoration and environmental protection is concerned. Now, these youth, high schoolers, grades 9 and 10, not 11 and 12, especially the high schools along Laguna Divide, they express their desire to pursue and to be involved in wetland restoration. And so we have to come up with, how do we do it? So we did the virtual we use the virtual platform in doing eco camp. So there are lectures, of course, lectures. It's not face-to-face. We didn't do field work, but we presented them a lot of photos on how to do it. And then we break out into small groups and then discuss, so that most of them do have experience visiting, say, the lake or the rivers. And we ask them, what do you see as problems? Okay, they say it's invasive alien species, especially in Laguna de Bay. After this Typhoon Ondoy in 2009, we have this increase of knife fish, and it displaces our endemic fish at Laguna Lake. So, of course, we cannot eradicate those invasive alien species. We can only manage. So that's one. And so the local government along Laguna Bay area, they came up with a fishbowl business using the knife fish. Accordingly, it's delicious, and it's they give revenue. It gives revenue, but they don't culture knife fish, of course. And the population is checked by catching this. And then high nutrient loading. That's one. The youth, they did identify there's high nutrient loading because of the release of domestic wastewater, untreated wastewater, because there's no sewage treatment facility in most areas along the lake and rivers. So they thought of coming up with constructed wetlands, in a most affordable constructed wetlands, to act as green filters, all right, to treat domestic wastewater. And so now, how do we sustain our contact with them? We provide funds for their prepaid data, because most of this youth, they only use the cell phones. They don't have Wi-Fi, or most of them don't have Wi-Fis. And so we have to provide some modest amount for them to purchase data. So that's it. It's a bit challenging financially, but we were able to get some sponsors who are willing to support our program.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pasicola. It's indeed also very interesting to hear the challenges of young people in the Philippines, trying to conserve biodiversity. Wi-Fi, never came across in my mind, as a challenge in conserving the lake and in the projects. So maybe, to get this discussion free flow and everybody to answer, I would just like to ask all the panelists here, if there's one key message you want to tell people on why you want to conserve that ecosystem you're working on, what would that be? And you can say it in like 2 to 3 sentences. Maybe Karen can go first.
Coral reefs are really the lifeblood of coastal communities. You protect it, you protect coastal communities within a tropical belt.
Thank you. Dr. Rahayu Sukri?
Okay, for me, the peats and heaths forests are actually, in terms of the burning of peat forests especially, that's when you get haze. So it's very important, very critical that we conserve peat forests so that we don't get these problems with haze. But also peat forests are like sponges. So if you destroy peat forests, you're gonna get problems with flooding and droughts and so on. So everything is linked together. So these forests may look very swampy, lots of mosquitoes and so on, but they're actually very crucial for all of the overall ecosystem in Brunei.
Thank you. Dr. Pasicolan.
Reaching out the youth. I'm so close to the youth, because the youth of today, they are the leaders of tomorrow. Now, we have proven that, because when we evaluated our campers, after 10 years, they are now the president of environmental organizations in the university or in their workplace. There's even 1 or 2 who had this zero waste program in Dubai while they were working there, and the Filipinos that were mobilized, and even non-Filipinos coming up with involving themselves doing
zero waste. And when we asked them what prompted them to do it, he said, we're so thankful because we attended the eco camps when we were in high school. And so we have proven we invest to the youth of today, because what they learn from that eco camp, when they grow older, they will not depart from it. And that's a proven principle.
Great, that's really, really great to hear. And you know, I'm touched by the amount of hope you have in young people. So yes, power to youth from Mika Tan. And you know, Dr. Pasikolan, you know, you mentioned start them young. So in that case, you know, do you have any advice for youth navigating the environmental scene or the biodiversity scene? And please, other speakers, you know, do contribute if you have suggestions too.
You know, the idealism of the youth is so pure, and they're not so much entangled with the cares of the world, so that whatever you feed them, be sure to feed them well. Whatever you feed them, they will absorb it, because their absorptive capacity is so good. So they're not thinking about taxes, bills to pay, a lot of things, even boy-girl relationship or love, courtship, and marriage. Environmental protection and natural resources conservation is so attractive to them, because they're close to nature and it's close to their heart, and it's something that is realistic. So I have this heart to invest my time, even my retirement days, spending time with the youth.
Thank you for that very, very sweet message. Maybe Dr. Rahayu Sukri, you can even share like in your personal experience, you know, growing up to be a scientist, and you know, maybe what inspired you, and what sort of advice you could give to like our aspiring scientists, or like such as myself, an aspiring plant ecologist and botanist.
Sure, happy to share. I would say I am somewhat of an anomaly when I first started in plant ecology in Brunei. In my own experience, I was expected to either become a medical doctor or a lawyer, all these different things, you know. But I was very insistent that I wanted to contribute something to the environment, and I wanted this career in tropical ecology in particular. And all it took was trips to the forest. So that's how for my own students, for others, that's where I think it's very crucial that you don't just talk to them about, oh, it's important to conserve biodiversity and so on. But yes, that's certainly important, but getting them out there and experiencing the forest, looking at our own biodiversity, that's even more important as well, because then they have that attachment to, okay, yes, we understand that, you know, these animals, these plants are very important. We had fun in the peat swamps. We don't want the peat swamps to go away, and so on. So that's that key engagement, that close mentorship of youth is very important to me.
And if you don't mind me asking, Dr. Rayusuki, as a female scientist, you know, in a very male-dominated field, you know, what kind of challenges do you have, if any, of course, you know, trying to, you know, help conserve biodiversity and at the same time, you know, really contribute to the field of science?
Thanks. I think, yes, you're right. It can be quite challenging as a female in this area, and I'm sure that my other fellow panelists today also agree. Coming particularly also from Brunei, where, as I mentioned, it's not, when I first started out, it wasn't common to see ladies going out to the forest. So family members keep asking me, why do you want to go to the forest? As I said, it's full of mosquitoes, it's full of wild beasts and so on. But things have changed. We have increasingly a lot of support from institutions, government bodies, even the youth. There's a lot more involvement of females. You see from the slides that I showed of my research team, most of them are actually girls, ladies. So these are, I think for Brunei, for me personally, I don't have any challenges gender-wise. I've never felt any gender discrimination in terms of how I wanted to proceed in terms of ecology and so on. It was just that initial bewilderment, I suppose, of people that why do you want to be a tropical ecologist? Why do you want to go to forests all the time? But that's, as I mentioned, that's increasingly being changed. And a key part of that is actually awareness, increasing people's awareness and people's acceptance of these careers in particular as normal. And it's not just expecting people to go to the traditional careers of being stuck in an office somewhere, to go out there to the forest and experience what we have in our own backyard. That's important.
Yes, I definitely agree. And, being the field of biodiversity is definitely not a traditional field, especially being in Singapore. So back to Karen, and, from Singapore to Singapore, growing up in a very, in a culture where things are very practical, how difficult was it for you, trying to be involved in marine biodiversity conservation? You're muted, Karen.
Thanks for the question, Carl. But before even I answer that, I just want to say, I was just reflecting, looking at all the participants here, just reflecting when I was a youth, I don't even think I had the kind of wisdom and knowledge that the youth today are showing. And I feel so inspired by that. I still feel that when I was the age of many of the youth here, it was still very playful. You weren't thinking about such big issues. But to see the youth of today sincerely concerned about the environment and wanting to do something in a very positive way, that's very inspiring. So thank you, everyone. I think it is this youthful energy that is really the power behind a lot of change that is being seen. In Singapore, like you mentioned, there is a challenge, but I think if nothing else, the last 2 years of the pandemic, where everyone was stuck in Singapore, showed us one important thing. We have a lot in Singapore. We have a lot, whether it's in a terrestrial environment or marine environment. It's healthy in many areas. There's so much to explore, and there's so much we can do to protect our own biodiversity in our backyard. And I think this realization that we have so much should spur people to want to continue to do more. So I don't think it's actually a place where there's nothing much to do. We have to leave Singapore to actually do the kind of conservation work. I think there's so much that can be done within Singapore.
Thank you, Karen. And that was definitely very true, and, being in Singapore, we might be a very small country, but, we also have a lot of potential. And, as ASEAN in the region itself, we have so much biodiversity. And, in this age of climate change, the anthropogenic crisis, there is a lot that we can do to help solve this important problem. So in the interest of time, I think we would like to kickstart session B. So thank you, panelists, for the presentations, and it was really, really enjoyable. So I think we would like to now invite, we have with us Ridawan, who studied biodiversity and forest ecology in his bachelor and master's degree. He strengthened his expertise in mountain conservation, a very rare habitat talked about, by doing an internship with Snow Leopard Conservancy in India, and even established the Tanah Tinggi Highland Conservation. His talk will be about protecting the life of the cloud forest, the most fragile ecosystem in the mountainous regions. Mr. Ridawan, please.
Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, that's good. Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the committee and for inviting me. This is really, I feel honored and humbled to sort of represent my community in Indonesia and what I've been doing for the past 2 years with Tanah Tinggi Highland Conservation. And today we are trying, sort of remembering what the meaning of wildlife, what the meaning of nature, and how we can protect it. Like, first of all, the main reason for us maybe because nature gives so much how to say services to us, and it is valuable on its own. But to be honest, in my opinion, why we as a human should protect nature is because our role. We are given with brain, we are given with consciousness, and we know that this world needed so and the nature needed, so we need to take an action. And that was also one of my motivation. And today I'm going to share basically a little bit of what we have done with my community for the past 2 years. Since 2019, we've been working in a mountain region in Central Java. It's called Mount Lawu. This is mountainous area, and I didn't know before, but I just found out recently in 2020 that the mountain that we're working with is a key biodiversity area. So I have more reason to work on this mountain. This next. Just a little bit of background. So in Tanah Tinggi, we are established in 2019, start working in the mid of 2019, and we are trying to protect biodiversity. And then with the community, we want to sustain the ecosystem service for sure for human well-being. And we are doing it by conducting research, education, and community empowerment. Um, Little background about mountain. I need to tell this and I need to share this because every time I go to new places, they don't really understand and realize what is the importance of mountain ecosystem and what is cloud forest itself. So just for your information, that the whole world, 22% of land surface is a mountainous region, and 12% of human population living in a mountain area. But surprisingly, that the mountain region provide 50% of water that we consume every day. So what is actually cloud forest? It is a mountain tropical forest. They have cloud every day, mist every day, and it is only making up 2.5% of tropical forest in the world. In Indonesia, we are located in a ring of fire. We have more than 400 mountains, but for 400 mountains, only 15% are protected under Indonesian law. Either it is national park or either it is natural reserve. And in Java, most of key biodiversity area are in mountain region. So in a small map of Java that you are looking at, and small pages that you see, that the brown one is a key biodiversity area that are in mountain region. Next. And we in Tanah Tinggi specifically working in Mount Lawu. I came from Central Java, and this month just like an hour from my hometown. I hike this mountain since 2007, and since then we start exploring, not only just enjoying the mountain as a trekker, but also start exploring. Since 2014, we've been recorded 694 species, and we believe that at least 25 among them are in IUCN red list species. We know Paphiopedilum javanicum, this is an orchid. Nicetus bartelsi, this is Javan hawk eagle. Manis javanica, I think it's pangolin. And also we have Javan leopard. This is just small representative what we found in a mountain. And also mountain region, they have a lot of what is it, endemic species. And this is what we found in Mount Lawu since 2014. And we are working with local community and also local student to collect the data. Next. And beside Lawu as a key biodiversity area, we also know Lawu as a life support system. There are 14 million people living around Mount Lawu, and the mountain provide water for 7 million people. And we found record at least 250 natural spring with fresh water. And mountain region is the main area to grow vegetables. 50% of our vegetables come from mountain area. And we should also know that mountain region, for a lot of Javanese people and a lot of people in the world, they have they are significantly how to say important for social and for society. Um, the civilization grew from the mountain. So here we found over 150 cultural and sacred sites in the mountain. So mountain is not only important for biodiversity itself, for ecosystem itself, but also protecting the mountain, meaning protecting the water, protecting our food security, and also protecting our identity as a community. Next, and in Tanah Tinggi, we are working with the community. So we often discuss with the young community and also local people what is the challenge, what we face. We know that the mountain is important and what is actually happening. And we try to discuss and we try to brainstorm and we summarize that this is are the most important how to say challenge that we face. First is agricultural land, um, and second is forest fire, and then water extraction, and the last is tourism. Agriculture for vegetables is important for our food security, but it is quite damaging for the environment because of the runoff, because of the erosion. It's directly next to the forest edges. Forest fire is quite natural and happen almost every year. We cannot do big about it. What we can do is just mitigate the fire itself. The water extraction happening because of the tourism development in mountain region. A lot of construction for villas, hotels, and restaurants cause a lot of water shortage, and local people start harvesting the water from the highland. And all these combined basically have resulting in sort of ecological disaster, more frequent flood, and also less bird erosion and stuff. So this is what we have identified with local people. So what I present here is not from a scientific paper or research. We brainstorm with local people. Next. And after we brainstorm with local people, we try to came up with what we could do, how we can collaborate with local people. I have a scientific background. I have academic background with my friends, with my group, and local people have their own local knowledge, and a young community has the manpower. So we decided to have scientific research in the mountain. We try to do community education and also conduct some action for restoring the ecosystem. Next. First, about scientific research. Since 2019, support from international donor and also local community and organization, we sorry, so we map the mammal in the mountain, and then we assess the forest structure and biodiversity. We also map the stressor, especially the waste there with local community and also with young organization. So all you can see here is local community that join our data collection. Next. And then from the data collection that we have after conducting research with them, the main challenge for them is analyzing the data. We have the ability to analyze the data. So after collecting the data, we try to help analyzing and then disseminate the result to them again. But it's not only for the young community, but we disseminate to children. We said disseminate it to young community, and also we disseminate it to local people. And they are happy with the result, and they are concerned about the result because those data they are collecting themselves. And that's what I learned really important in this kind of process. And consulting and discussing the result with them, basically resulting also in ideas and solution and recommendation that they want to do for their own or local ecosystem. Next. And after that, This is we have two conservation action that actually not based on our idea, but also we generate this idea with local people. First, we do a periodic clean up for a mountain, and also we do planting in mountain region. To restore the ecosystem, what the most important thing to do is actually to bring back the forest and the vegetation. But we have to learn a lot for this because in Mount Labu, we lack of resource in terms of seedling and also the species of the seedlings. So far, we only plant two species of timber, uh, damar and eucalyptus, because those species are widely available and it's easy to access. But we realize that is not the best option for us. We need to have more native and have more diverse species to restore the ecosystem. That's why we have this forest assessment. We try to identify what kind of native species of cloud forest that we can produce ourselves. Next. So from this sort of presentation, and from my experience for the past 2 years, I would say that working with local community, either it is local people or the young community or the organization, this is the best way to get resources and manpower. Local community, they have so much knowledge and relevant to the local situation, and working with them, giving a higher chance of program success and a bigger impact for the ecosystem itself. Um, that's from the program side, but from the restoration side, the conservation side, we realize that planting only few species is not really desired for ecosystem restoration. So now what we are trying to do is actually connect with Ministry of Environment. They actually provide a wider range of seedling freely, and we are also trying to approach local people who has farmland in the mountain. So what we are trying to do is now is restoring the function of the farmland, not the main cloud forest, but the degraded area around cloud forest that are managed by farmers through agroforestry. But this is the idea that we are developing at the moment. So we are listing the species that people want to plant, and also listing what is available, and start discussing how we can the trees and how we plant it. So this is from Tanah Tinggi, what we could share. I hope we have more discussion during the session. Thank you very much.
Okay. Terima kasih, Ridwan. Thank you so much. And great to hear from a fellow ASEAN Youth Biodiversity leader. So yay AYBLs. So we now welcome Frida. Yes. Yeah, thank you. We'll now welcome Frida. So Frida will talk about her experience in taking action to restore and conserve mangroves that brings her opportunities to become a world mangrove scientist and to explore mangroves around the globe. Frida, please.
Thank you. I'm Frida Siddiq from Indonesia. I'm a researcher at the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries. So I'm very pleased to be here to talk about why we have to restore our mangrove forests. And I will also give some intro on how important is mangrove ecosystem, especially in our region, and the project that I've been working on mangrove restoration lately. I will also share my environmental journey as a mangrove ecologist that hopefully can give you motivation to commit with nature conservation activities. Okay, next. So I would like to start about mangrove. What is mangrove? Mangrove is a coastal vegetation that inhabits intertidal areas along the coast in the tropics and also subtropics around the world. So over about 13 million hectares of mangrove forests are distributed around the globe, and we can find it in over 124 countries. So actually, we live in the region with the very highest mangrove biodiversity. And next, the country with the largest mangrove forests are in Indonesia, with over about 3 million hectares of mangrove spreading out in the 34 provinces. So we have like the green show, but the very mangrove in a good condition. Next. So why we have to restore mangrove? Why mangrove is important? So mangrove is a home for reptiles, amphibians, fish, mammals, birds. So mangrove provide habitats, nurseries, spawning grounds for the biota. Next. And for human, mangrove also provide unique landscape for recreation. So a mangrove can be sourced as the economic for the livelihood as well. And because mangrove also provide a habitat for very diverse flora and fauna, so mangrove provide the site to explore and to understand about the nature. Next. So mangrove also provide protection. This function is related to their root structure that very unique and robust. So if we can see here the picture, mangrove can have different species, can have different structure of roots like pencil roots, like Avicennia, prop roots, and canoe roots. So this kind of roots give a mangrove capacity to attenuate, to absorb the wave, and also to give the stabilization, sediment fertilization, and the soil retention on the coast. So during the study, in the studies lately, shows that the storm protection of mangrove can value about more than $8,000 per hectares. Next. So mangrove is also a 24 hours market. So mangrove can provide source for fisheries. More than 50% of people in the developing countries, nation relies on fish. So mangrove contribute to almost 30% of the fish, and then 100% prawn catch on the Southeast Asia. And also mangrove can be like edible plants, like the fruits, leaves, and flowers can be processed for foods, drinks, and medicine. And also for the raw products, not only for the tree stands, but also they can be used for, let's say, for coloring, for batiks, and also for any kind of product. Next. So the product provided in the supermarket is related to their biodiversity. So if we look at the mangrove forest inside, there's not only one species or two species, but many species. Even our site in Bali, we can find more than 10 more species in the site. Like they have different kinds of structures in flowers, fruits, roots, and also leaves. So here we next. And beside the benefits of mangrove associate for fisheries, the supermarket also provide like collected products value for a local community, and also can generate mangrove related activities for women. So here we can see that the local people, women can use the mangrove leaves for tea, and also use the dye of the mangrove for dye for the batik here. Next. And here we see that mangrove also play important role in regulating climate. It's related to mangrove capacity to absorb and store CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So this ability lays mostly in the mangrove soils that store huge amount of organic carbon that stays for more than 100 years. So we call this capacity as a blue carbon. Next. But nowadays we see that mangrove are being degraded, so reducing their ability to absorb the CO2. So instead of like they store it, they also can emit CO2. So the critical role of mangrove has been overlooked. So what we have to do next? Next, so I would like to suggest the youth to think global and act local for the mangrove. Next. We can see that the so many opportunities we can find in mangrove restoration, like many mangrove countries like Indonesia has taken action in the mangrove forest by establishing conservation and restoration program. So for example, in Indonesia, the government has declared to rehabilitate about 600,000 hectares of mangrove by 2024. So this project is also combined with the economic recovery during this pandemic period. So if the mangrove restoration is successful, we can get many benefits over the cost we spend for the restoration. So the estimate benefit for value is for goods and services. It includes the climate change mitigation as blue carbon, improve livelihood, and also we can get a free continuous fresh air in the air. Next. So this is the our project site in Bali. So I will talk about more about this site. We have been conducted the restoration since 2004. So our site was abandoned shrimp ponds, as we can see in this picture in 2000 in an estuary in Bali. In 2004, we started to reconvert the site into mangrove forest by planting and also the hydrological restoration. So here we can see today the site is full of mangrove, and then we also documented this activity in our publication. So next. We also set up the mangrove nurseries to provide seedlings for local people who are interested to involve in the restoration. And we also do monitoring of the growth of the mangrove, both in the restored and then intact mangrove around the site. So we do research, and we also invite students who want to do research in our site. Next. And we've got a huge positive response from local community and school children. So we created a public awareness program, not only for mangrove restoration, but also for mangrove cleanup. As you can see that so many rubbish around the mangrove. So we invite students not only to plant or restore or protect the mangrove, but also to keep the mangrove clean. So from school children. Next, we also, with this restoration program, we also expand the program to the media, like we have like making video, and then also we hold the mangrove vlog competition for the youth. So we have so much a good response from these activities. Next. And what this is, the restoration program is part of my journey as the mangrove ecologist. From the local action, I bring up this experience and knowledge to the international forum and the networks. So I share my local knowledge from what I got on my site, with my skill and expertise as a mangrove ecologist throughout the meetings, workshop, trainings, and expert exchange. And next, and the last but not least, my experience and knowledge enable myself to build international networks that takes me to visit the mangrove all around the world. So I think that all my speak today. Next, I hope that you enjoy it, so you can discuss after this. Thanks.
Thank you, Frida. And I seen that you traveled to the Amazon, which
Yes,
is the
yes.
other half of the world. Must have been amazing, seeing all these mangroves. Thank you
Yep.
so much for sharing. Okay. So last but definitely not the least, we have Stephen Elliott, and his talk will explore how to match forest restoration methods, employed with forest degradation stages, distinguished on a scale by tipping points. The methods will include natural regeneration, assisted natural regeneration, the framework species method, maximum diversity method, and nurse plantations on the sites of degradation levels from 1 to 5 respectively. Stephen Elliott, please.
Hello everybody, I'm Stephen Elliott from the Forest Restoration Research Unit of Chiang Mai University, and today I would like to offer the following topic for discussion by this panel session. How should we match forest restoration techniques with different levels of site degradation? All over the world, millions of people are planting billions of trees in the hope that these trees will suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and reduce the greenhouse effect that is causing global warming. But is all this tree planting activity really necessary? In some places, natural regeneration works very well to restore the forest without any tree planting. So the question now becomes, how do we know where to rely on natural regeneration, where we should be planting trees, and where perhaps we should be combining both of these techniques? So what we've done at FORU is to try to define 5 stages of degradation, and each of these stages is separated by a tipping point. One is the least degraded condition, and stage 5 is the most degraded condition. And when you reach the tipping point from one stage down to the next stage, a considerable increase in effort in terms of forest restoration is required. So let's start with stage 1 degradation. This one is selective logging, and if you go into a selectively logged area, in most cases these areas have everything they need to undergo natural regeneration. There are plenty of seedlings growing on the forest floor, there are seed sources nearby from unlogged areas, and there are animals like birds, maybe even elephants and civets are present to move the seeds from those remnant fragments of forest into the restoration site. So what to do with these areas? Really, protection is all that is necessary. We need to prevent encroachment, obviously, because if you don't do that, these sites will slide down to stage 2 or stage 3 degradation. We need to keep out the fire. We need to keep out, or at least to control the numbers of cattle in these areas, because they will eat the regenerating seedlings. And we need to make sure that there's no hunting of those essential seed dispersing animals that will bring in the seeds of tree species from the surrounding remnant fragments of forest. Tipping point 1 is reached when the canopy becomes more open and light intensity at ground level therefore increases. This stimulates the growth of herbaceous weeds, which grow up and start to smother the natural regeneration. Under this circumstance, it's not enough simply to protect the natural regeneration, although of course you must continue to do that. It becomes necessary to actually assist the growth of that natural regeneration and to ensure its survival. Assisted natural regeneration is called ANR, and mostly that involves cutting back the weeds and sometimes also applying fertilizer. Where natural regeneration is dense, the ANR technique works very well. Here you can see our trial site in southern Thailand, and it's full of natural regeneration, but that natural regeneration is being suppressed by the weeds. After about 6 months of cutting back the weeds and applying fertilizer and doing a bit of mulching, the site closed canopy. and 11 years after applying ANR to this site, you can see the forest has the look and feel of a natural forest. Tipping point 2 is reached when the amount of natural regeneration on the site slips below the critical threshold value, which is required to close canopy within about 2 to 3 years. In northern Thailand, this is about 3,000 stems per hectare. Under this circumstance, you still have to protect the remaining natural regeneration and maybe assist it with ANR, but you also have to plant trees now to increase the natural regeneration from the amount already on site to the amount required to close canopy in 2 to 3 years. But luckily, you don't have to plant all the tree species that made up the original forest ecosystem, because there are still seed dispersers on these kinds of landscapes, and there are still remnant pieces of forest to act as seed sources. The tree species that we plant under these circumstances are called framework tree species, and they are typically around 10% of the tree species that are characteristic of the reference forest, but they are selected to have the following properties. First of all, they have to have high survival and growth rates when planted out into dry, open, exposed areas like this one. They should have dense spreading crowns that will shade out the weeds and rapidly what we call recapture the site. And they should produce perhaps fruit, nectar or perching sites to attract those seed dispersing animals to come into the restoration sites and drop the seeds of all the other species which we don't need to plant with this method. We plant about 20 to 30 of these framework tree species on each site, augmenting the natural regeneration that's already there to achieve a final stocking density of about 3,000 trees per hectare. After planting, the trees receive doses of fertilizer and a weeding treatment at least 3 times in the first and second rainy seasons after planting, and of course we take care of fire prevention during the dry season. Here are some of the results from our plots. This is our study site in May 1998, just before we started trialing the technique. And here we are in September 2016, everything on the left of the track is about 15 years old, and everything on the right of the track is about 9 years old. You can see this technique really does accelerate forest recovery. When you go inside of these plots, you can see massive amounts of natural regeneration. Most of these seedlings are coming back from seeds which were dispersed into the area by birds. Biodiversity recovery is rapid and carbon levels normalize in about 25 years. So the framework species technique depends on natural seed dispersal to recover biodiversity. And tipping point 3 is reached when that seed dispersal no longer operates efficiently, either because there are no seed sources left in the landscape, or because hunting has extirpated the seed dispersing animals. Under those circumstances, instead of just planting 20 to 30 framework tree species, you have to plant nearly all the tree species that comprise the original reference forest ecosystem, and that's called maximum diversity methods, or MDMs. Perhaps the best known of the maximum diversity techniques is the Miyawaki method, invented by Professor Miyawaki, who you see there on the right shaking my hand. His technique divides a restoration site up into potential natural vegetation units based on the soil and climatic conditions across the site, and then matches species to those conditions. Saplings are grown in a nursery up to 30 to 50 centimeters tall, and up to 90 species are planted on each individual site. The technique is very intensive and uses very high planting densities, up to 30,000 trees per hectare, or 60 centimeters apart. However, these very, very high tree planting densities could be regarded as overkill in some areas. This is the UPM Bintulu campus plot. It's 26 years old and the trees were planted at 6,000 per hectare. That's double the number we use for the framework species technique. And what you see here is that the trees are competing with each other and they are incredibly thin for trees of 26 years old. So the next tipping point is reached when the soil becomes so degraded it becomes almost impossible to plant most tree species under these conditions. The treatment of these sites is to plant what we call nurse tree species that will function to improve the soil ecosystem before you can plant framework tree species or maximum diversity tree species. We are recommending two groups of trees to serve as nurse trees, one to take care of substrate structure and the other one to take care of substrate nutrient levels. The first are the figs with their expansive root systems that push apart blocks of substrate, opening channels for water and oxygen to get into the substrate and feed the roots of the other trees. The legumes, of course, fix nitrogen and can greatly improve the nutrient status of the substrates. And here are the results of a mixture of legumes and figs on a highly degraded limestone quarry in Lampang, not so far from the university. You can see it is possible to close canopy within 2.5 years using this technique. And the wildlife, they would species into this site. So here's the whole concept in a single, easy to understand diagram. We have the stages of degradation 1 to 5 here, and the responses to those stages of degradation here. And the tipping points, just to remind you, the first one is when weeds start to suppress seed establishment. The second one is when there simply isn't enough natural regeneration to close canopy. The third one, between the framework species method and the maximum diversity methods, is when there is insufficient seed dispersal to recover biodiversity. And the fourth one is when even the soil becomes so degraded it cannot support many of the tree species that we want to plant. So at this point you're probably wondering how to actually recognize on the ground when you're up against one of these tipping points. Of course, there are lots of online tools and assessment procedures available to help you to do just that. You can go to Google Earth, for example, to find out where the nearest forest is as a seed source. You can go and do a survey in the reference forest to find out what are the characteristic species of your reference forest. You can do a rapid site assessment in the restoration site to measure the pre-existing density of natural regenerants, and of course you can consult local people for knowledge about what seed dispersing animals might be common in the area and where to go to find seed trees to grow your planting stock. All of these procedures are explained in a great deal of detail in Restoring Tropical Forests, a practical guide. You can download it completely free of charge from our website www.foru.org. That's it. I hope some of these ideas will stimulate some lively discussion to follow, and thank you for listening. Hello everybody.
Thank you, Stephen.
I'm Stephen Elliott from
Thank you, Stephen Elliott. So after hearing about
the Forest Restoration Research Unit,
sorry about the technical difficulties. So after hearing the presentations from our invited speakers, it is now time for our second panel discussion. So thank you to everyone in the audience who submitted some of these questions. So like if we have time, we will try to answer them as much as possible. And let us also invite Ridwan and Frida back, please. So Ridwan, a question for you would be, given that mountain ecosystems are so rare and fragile, Then I'm just thinking, as someone from Singapore, how can we better engage people, especially those who might live in cities or away from mountains, to care for such ecosystems? You're muted.
Oh yeah, I will answer directly. Thank you, Carl, for the question. Good question actually, because people who are coming to the mountain region is actually people from the city. They are having the weekend escape and also do mountaineering and stuff. And at least for now, what we are trying to do is having this workshop and a discussion with a mountaineering community. Uh, Surely they care about the mountain, but they don't have a proper knowledge. For now, they only have the knowledge about how to properly climb, how to prepare a survival skill, but they don't know about how to manage their own garbage and how to treat the vegetation in a mountain. They don't even know how, when they meet monkeys and wild boars, they don't know how to react. So we're trying to discuss and share our knowledge about this kind of condition with them, especially also about the forest structure and vegetation, why they are experiencing temperature decrease when they get along. And it is really nice to share and to link the scientific background of the ecosystem and to what they're experiencing in the mountain. And it was really sort of lively having discussion with them, and they're sort of like, now I know, or now I know. So at least from this realization, we hope of awareness to come. And then after that, at least what we are hoping is at least they can share the knowledge that we have discussed to other to their peers, climbers and mountaineers, and to manage their own garbage and not at least destroying or yes, destroying the ecosystem.
Thank you, thank you. So maybe I'll move on to Frida. Frida, so you talked about, think global, act local. Was there a time maybe it was better to think local and act global instead? Because, like, for example, understanding the local context of mangrove restoration and then applying it to global policies. Maybe you could elaborate on that further.
Yeah, what I'm thinking that like mangrove is like very very close connected with the local people. Like sometimes like what we think like mangrove as like a national or issue or global issue, but instead of that, I see that mangrove is like the actors is people. The actors are people in the local. So when we think about mangrove as a not like a local things, like they think like they forgot the connection between mangrove and people, especially in the livelihood. So sometimes the program is not successful. So that's what I'm thinking. Like, but we have to think that how important mangrove not only for local people, like only one city or one site, but is for a world as a nature. Yeah, like a whole. Like let's say like what we have now, the issue of blue carbon. We see that international forum is very concerned about mangrove, and they try to help people in very very local area. Yeah, like in Papua, like where we can see like a very remote area. The international forum is very concerned about their life there. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about the think global, but we have to act local to save mangrove in the local and for the people as well.
Yeah, definitely agree to that as well. Maybe just a personal question, Frida, why are mangroves important to you? And it can be very deep down personal reasons or motivations, in your work and all that.
Yeah, it's just very interesting story about myself. Like when I start to do my work at the ministry, my first task is about to do research on mangrove and tsunami. That's how my interest on mangrove started. And from then I learned that how important mangrove, because it's very unique. Like maybe people think like mangrove is like a swamp, dirty, not important. It's a source of disease or something like that. But inside there are so many mystery about mangrove, and it's very challenging to not only for study but only to get in is very challenging. Yeah, and then I see that in Indonesia, it's the largest mangrove country. It's only few people learned like an expert as a mangrove expert. So this is like my call that, especially like I'm a woman. Yeah? So we have to prove that in this our region we have to get more people to get interest to conserve and learn more about mangrove. And then for the youth, I think it's now many young people get more interested to get involved in mangrove program, not only conservation, research, restoration, and many things. Yeah. So I really support them. Yeah.
Thank you. Just one quick question from the chat, actually. So someone asked, what's the national guideline for mangrove restoration, and who usually initiates these efforts most of the time? And another question is, what's the species do you plant mostly in Avicennia, Rhizophora, Bulgaria, and what is their survival rate?
Yeah. Okay. So the national guideline, actually, mangrove is like very complicated issue in Indonesia because many ministry, many stakeholders involved in mangrove issues. So at this moment, we have about 4 key ministries have like a key ministry that manage the mangrove. So the 4 ministry are now we trying to develop the guidelines. Yeah, but because in the past management, the Minister of Forestry take the role, but now we want to get more integrated nationally. And then for the mangrove species that we planted, like as we know that we use monospecies Rhizophora because it's very easy to plant it. But we found out that mangrove, the monospecies is not properly, could be not a right option because mangrove is site specific. Yeah, maybe in one site, mangrove Avicennia is more suitable because they are the natural habitat. But then because we lack of knowledge, instead of we plant Avicennia, we plant Rhizophora. So the growth rate is very low. So this is what we want to introduce now to the government when we want to set up the restoration guidelines. Like we have to see mangrove as a site specific, so not only one species but have to be multi-species. And I hope that during this restoration program, the 600,000 hectares program, we can initiate this approach as well.
Yeah, so it's not just bakau or api-api. Yeah. You have to think about like other species of trees, because like forests, it's very diverse, and we have to ensure that for the ecosystem to stay healthy, we need to have that diversity. So I want to go to Stephen Elliott now. Your work in inventing this restoration strategy and method, it's amazing, and throughout Southeast Asia as well. So maybe just to ask, what is it like working in different countries for your projects, especially when working with various cultures and communities?
Well, of course, we have to work with communities all of the time, and the thing about communities is that they're infinitely variable. And we have a long-term relationship with a particular community where we've worked here in northern Thailand, and the relationship goes up and down with the politics of that particular community. And people say all the time, you've got to work with the community, as if the community is one thing. And what a lot of social scientists don't seem to understand is that communities have political differences of opinions, just like urban areas and regular people. There's no such thing as the community. It depends on the individuals in that community, whether you can find people that are enthusiastic to in our case to plant trees and persuade others to join in. So when you're working with communities, you have to be tenacious. You can't give up. If the community says they don't want to do it for this or that reason, you have to work and find a compromise. And then in some years you'll get people who are more conservation minded, and maybe the village head will change and another administration comes in which is not so conservation orientated, and you throw your hands up and you say, well, we can't work with these people, and you walk away. Don't do that. You have to stay, and you have to stay long term. This is the other thing. This is a bit of a problem. Project funders and sponsors, they only tend to give money for like 2 or 3 years. That's not going to build a relationship with the community. The community we've been working with here, or one of them here in Northern Thailand, we've been working with them now for 20 years. And the idea is that you carry on, bringing in the funds and raising the money, because as an outside organization, us academics and NGOs, we can probably do that better than communities. And that's what communities find that very, very difficult. So carry on raising the funds, carry on organizing, carry on providing the technical advice, no matter what. Just don't give up. And it could be exasperating working with some communities, and you have to just carry on smiling and carry on working.
Well, definitely, the forest restoration is not just a scientific endeavor. It is very interdisciplinary, and as we can see, in everybody, the panelists have been saying, the amount of not just scientific depth, but even to understand the social and economic aspects of restoration is equally important. So actually, I also have another question from the chat, and I want to ask Ridwan. So someone asked, I'm wondering if you have encountered conflicts between restoration and people's access to land, and how were those resolved, if so?
Oh yeah, so of course, in mountain region, it is not especially in Mount Lawu, it is not protected area, other national park or nature reserve. It is protection forest. So basically, the management is belong to forest agency, and local community have the right to manage just the forest, the ages of the forest, like 1 hectare or maybe half hectare, and the conflict is, maybe it's not a big conflict, but it is hard to convince them to plant certain species of trees, because right now they are only growing grasses for the livestock, and the forest agency really want to plant some trees as a border, and basically to amplify the border. So this is the border between the forest and also the community. So that's actually the challenge that we face. But they are actually quite, how to say, for now at least, the community that are working with, they are quite knowledgeable about the ecosystem service that they receive. Maybe because in 2010 or in 98, I think during the high deforestation period of Indonesia, they deforested the forest in highland, and then they experienced a huge flood and a big log really entering the river stream. And after that, they realized. So when we are talking about what to plan and what to do in a forest, they are actually quite how to say, good listener, but they are really careful to decide what we are going to do with them. So is it beneficial for us? Is it going to cause disaster? So for now, like what we said, we are not really agree yet on what we want to plan in the forest ages, but there are certain methods that we are discussing with them. For sure, we are not going to plant eucalyptus anymore because we have compared the biodiversity in eucalyptus stand and also the cloud forest. It's incomparable, I would say. And it was long program from the forest agency, and we try to persuade them to not planting those species anymore. So now we are listing the species that are available in Ministry of Environment, and the desire of the local community. So mostly they want to plant fruit tree rather than timber in the forest edges in the land that they are allowed to manage within 5 or the next 10 years.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you
But
for the answer.
a lot of discussion. Like we have to expect
Yeah.
a lot of discussion with community.
Yeah, I think it's something that I've learned also in my forest restoration projects in Singapore is that you have to listen, not just to nature, but even to people sometimes. So yeah, it can be a bit okay, I won't say irritating, but like, it's a lot of practice, and it's a lot of listening. So you have to have a very open heart and mind, Yeah, and I totally agree, and I can feel, empathize with your experience.
Yes, and don't forget they are smart, they have knowledge, and those knowledge are quite resourceful for us. I learned a lot from the local community, what to plan, when to plan, which area, which area is important for biodiversity and which area are not. I learned a lot from them as well.
Agreed. Okay, so maybe just to move slightly away from the social lens, I actually want to ask Stephen Elliott, because you have all these scientific methods. How can technology, maybe even AI or drones, help with your restoration projects or strategies? And other speakers, if you have things to contribute, please do come in. Yeah, Stephen Elliott.
Well, we're getting very heavily into the technology, A, because it's useful, and B, because it's fun. I'm a semi-retired professor, and I'm getting paid to play with toy airplanes. It's wonderful. It's wonderful stuff. So we're using quadcopter drones to go up and, first of all, to survey the sites before you plant. So like I said, you have to balance the natural regeneration that's already there with what you want to plant. If you've got enough natural regeneration already there, then you don't have to plant anything. Although you might need to assist it. So what's the best way to do that? You can go onto the site with a pole and a piece of string 5 meters long, and you put the pole in and you walk around in a circle and you count the natural regenerants there, and you've got to pay your students, like you've got to buy them lunch and coffee, and you've got to hire a Land Rover to get there. It's terribly, terribly expensive. And then at the end of the day, you have 10 points in this vast area where you've collected your data, and you're going to extrapolate from these 10 points to come up with a plan for the whole site. And, students wanting to go home early or get to the coffee shop early, they'll go to the site and they'll put their poles in places where there aren't many trees. So that'll make it look like there aren't many trees on the whole plot, and you end up planting too many trees. But if you put the drone up, you can do a grid. You've seen how these things work, right? They do a grid type survey of the whole thing. From that, you can generate a 3D model. And then you can take that 3D model and you can look at it in detail. You can measure the trees in the 3D model, and you have a permanent record of what the site, the whole site, not just 10 little points, the whole site looked like right from the beginning. And then you can fly exactly the same mission 5 years later, and you can make another model, and you can see how all the trees have come up. And you don't have to dash around on the ground trying to take pictures from all different angles. You've got the whole thing. Every tree on that site is in that model, and you can go back to it and you can measure them whatever you like. And the flying takes about 15 minutes. You sit at your table, you set your table up, you've got your flask of coffee and your sandwiches, and you press the button and the drone goes up, and you can relax, wait for it to come back, because it's all autonomous. And then you have this wonderful 3D model, and you can all get back down to the coffee shop, before they close. So it's not just surveying the site, we're using these drones now to fly over the forest and look for seed trees. And that's pretty important. We've heard from two projects today, which, you know, they're trying to do forest restoration, but they're complaining they don't have the planting stock. And so they're only planting like five species on the peat swamp forest, and then just 2 or 3 species in the montane forest. Wouldn't it be great to put a drone up and fly over the remnant peat swamp forest or montane forest and find the trees which have the seeds? And of course, with the drone, you log the GPS coordinates of that. You give your workers a handheld GPS, well, a mobile phone will do, and they can walk directly to the trees and collect the seeds, bring them out of the forest, and you're growing planting stock from the reference forest ecosystem. And you don't have to hope that the government nursery down the road is growing the particular species that you want, because they probably aren't. Restoration species tend to be, you know, sometimes they're timber trees, but sometimes they're not. They tend to be the more obscure species, but they do really well in restoring the ecosystem. So using drones to find the seeds to start the whole process is another way in which we can use technology. But I advise any of the youth out there, if you're thinking of getting into forest restoration, learn how to fly a drone. Your departments probably have them. I mean, most departments have this kind of technology, and we're certainly making sure that all of our ecology students graduate at bachelor's level being able to fly a drone. That was rather long, I'm sorry.
No,
I get excited about drones.
Yes, exactly. I'm just so happy to hear, you know, how it's being used in the field and all that. Yeah, maybe next time, you know, I'll bring my Nespresso machine into the forest and then have my coffee and then operate my drone at the site, you know, just looking at my forest and monitoring it. Yeah, definitely. I think learning, you know, especially the new techniques. So I'll like, you know, just other recommendations, you know, learning about softwares like ArcGIS, GIS, geographic infographic systems,
Absolutely.
you know, are really important, you know, in this day and age of ecology. So I think I'm just going to go with my last question, and this is for all the panelists. So same as with session A, you know, and I know Stephen Elliott did talk about the advice for youth. So maybe like, you know, in your own time growing up and going in this field, if there's one thing you want to tell your younger self that you could do better, what would that be? You know, to be in the forest restoration. Maybe we start with Frida first.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I remember when I was in Singapore to visit the Buloh mangrove forest, and we talk about I met many students. You know, we talk about mangrove and everything. So once I asked them, do you know about mangrove, and do you think mangrove is important? And they said like, yeah, I know it's important, but we don't know how to do with mangrove. So what I'm thinking, like for the youth, like if you have a passion about conserving or saving the nature, just go for it. And because there are many experts who can support you. And then if you have any like interest questions, just feel free to ask them. Yeah. And then I think that if you protect the nature, you can get the benefit for yourself, not only because you love the nature, but also you can provide something good for your community as well. Yeah.
And maybe you can have Ridwan, you want to share?
Okay, this is tough question, but maybe my answer is too technical. From my experience, I have difficulties on when we want to restore a forest. I basically just don't have the whole knowledge what to plant. I know the tree, I know which one the tree, but I don't know nothing about the tree. So if I could tell my younger self, I would like, hey, you should learn about vegetation more, like into species level, not just the whole community. I love forest structure, I love vegetation community, but it was hard to learn into the species level. So I would love to know more about that right now when I want to give recommendation what kind of trees that we have to plant. So that one, very technical. Thank you.
No, no, no. It's a very important advice, and I think for anybody who's interested in restoration, I think just doing a course on maybe understanding biodiversity at the species level or the ecosystem level, I think having that basic course is quite key into your future work. And maybe last, Stephen Elliott. I mean, you are
Yeah,
retired,
he
semi-retired.
stole my answer. He stole my answer. I've just written down learn more plant names on my pad here. So you've got two speakers in total agreement here. Learn to recognize the flora. Learn not just the trees but the weeds that are killing the trees.
Yes.
and the whole ecosystem thing. And of course, if you're doing biodiversity monitoring and you want to use like birds as an indicator group of species to determine whether or not the biodiversity is recovering, there's birds names, and just buy all the field guides, the birds and the mammals and the plants and the trees, and just take them out with you and try to learn the names of things. And not just Latin names. I mean, as scientists, we must learn the Latin names because we're scientists, but also the local names, so that when you talk to local people about what, they're not going to give you the Latin names of things that they like to plant. They're going to use local names. So match the local names with the Latin names. Yeah. Good answer.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Oh, my answer.
I would definitely take these advice into consideration as an aspiring plant ecologist. And from a very young age, actually I learned the vernacular names first. So like Shoria, Meranti,
Yep.
Hopia is like Merawan, and
Yep.
there's Tamak and Kuring. So I think having and knowing plant names, though some people have told me, it's not really important, it's actually so important, because names are like the keys to databases of about that species and deciding what to plant. So I think thank you, panelists, for that discussion. And Stephen, Elliott, do you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say that the reason why I got into trouble on this was because when I started up the unit, I worked with a very competent botanist called J.F. Maxwell, and he was living in, he was working in the department. So I became very lazy. Whenever I wanted a species named, I just take it to Max and said, what's this? And then he died, and he passed away. And suddenly I thought, oh, I wish I'd just learned more of these things myself and didn't rely on him quite so much. So yeah. Learn your trees.
Definitely. So maybe another tip, just in general, go to your local botanist. In Singapore, we have like Dr. Sean Lam and Dr. Amy Chong in anywhere. So go to them and learn as much plant names as possible.
Yeah, and go out with the botanists when they're actually collecting. That's so much more instructive than visiting them in the herbarium, because these botanists, they pull out their little dried, shriveled specimens, and there's no way you can recognize that in the field. But go out with them when they're actually collecting their specimens and take lots of pictures. And there are lots of electronic apps that you can point your camera at a plant now and click it, but it's really not the same as working with a professional botanist. So if you're lucky enough to have one as a friend, or that you can call on, or volunteer to go and carry their poles. They have these heavy steel poles that they put up in the forest with the hooks on the end. Volunteer to carry their poles and their plant presses, and then you get all this information coming back. And
yes. Thank you. So thank you everyone for taking the time to share your knowledge with us. I'll now pass the time back to Waikit to lead the next segment.
Thank you so much, Carl. We'll now proceed to our next segment, the facilitated discussions in small breakout groups. The breakout session will first begin with some icebreakers, followed by a more in-depth discussion on the topics presented today. We strongly encourage all participants to turn on your videos later and participate actively in the discussions. Our speakers and a few observers will be visiting your breakout rooms to listen in on your discussions, but don't be scared of them. They might have additional valuable insights to share with everyone. May I request that our facilitators be on standby? I will now send the Google Jamboard links in the chat for the respective groups to input their ideas so that we can share them later on. When the rooms are open, please proceed to the group you have been assigned to. To facilitate the discussion, please stay within the same group and do not change breakout rooms. We'll be sending announcement to the breakout rooms to update on the remaining time. The discussion will last for an hour. The rooms will now be open, so please proceed to the groups that you have been pre-assigned to, and your designated facilitator will take you through the discussion. We'll see everyone back here in an hour for the combined sharing. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for actively participating in the conversations. I will now call on a representative from each group to share key points with everyone in this large group sharing segment. We kindly ask that you keep your presentations within 2 minutes so that every group will have the chance to share. May I first invite a representative from Group 2 to start us off on the first discussion question and any other interesting points that your group wants everyone else to hear.
Hi, I guess I'm from Group 2. So I'm Tsuting. Nice to meet everyone. So for regarding topic 1, I think something that we really learn a lot from is this realization that sometimes we are more familiar with the ecosystems that we are keen about overseas rather than the ones that are closer to us. You know, for example, many of us one of us from the Philippines said that he knows more about the peatlands in Indonesia more than the freshwater systems in where he is. Or for some of us in Singapore, we realize that we don't know enough about coral ecosystem over here in Singapore. So it really is very refreshing for us to hear from all the diverse speakers today, and our honor as well to learn so much and really consider what is it that we don't know enough about our local, and how can we think globally about it but act locally. That's us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tsuting. Let's move on to Group 3 for now. Group 3.
Hi, I'll be sharing for Group 3. Timer. Okay, so basically there were 3 main ideas. So the first one was we were very heartened to see all the restoration of the specific habitats out there. So in yellow, Dr. Freda's talk about mangroves and also learning about peat forests and mountain habitats and whatnot, we were actually thinking opposite to the first group, actually is these habitats that for those of us in Singapore, the mangroves habitats like Sungai Buloh is very accessible to us, and that's why we know the most about it as compared to peatlands and mountainous forests that we may not have access to, and that's why we may feel the most strongly and resonate with it more. And other than that, there was the point about engaging communities. So it having to be a very long-term effort and really tapping onto their local knowledge and getting the community involved in the process, whether it's tree planting or it actually also helps to educate them, and it's a form of engagement to get the community to advocate for restoration as well. And lastly is the use of science and research to actually find the very specific measures we need, what plants we need to plant, or identifying the tipping points so we can best manage and everything very efficiently and most effectively. So those are our points.
Okay, thank you so much, Group 3. Let's move on to Group 4.
Yeah, so I'll be sharing. I'm Klein. So I think firstly, like what the previous person mentioned, I think for this deforestation, I think very important to learn the right, learn and then select the right plants, the species of plants that we want to involve them in the deforestation. So this is to upkeep the native fauna and also for them to thrive in the remnant habitats. Yeah. Then for another point for myself is what I found interesting was also the cloud forest and the mountain areas. I think because Singapore doesn't really have this kind of areas where the community will be much more interested in. So I think it was quite a fresh perspective of how these mountain habitats are actually important for the habitat and also the struggles that was associated with these law. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you so much, Group 4. Thanks for wrapping up our first discussion question. Moving on to the next discussion question, may I invite a representative from Group 5 to start us off with the second discussion question and any other interesting points that your group want everyone else to hear.
Okay, so I think I will represent in the interest of time. I think just, what we can do, after this talk, not just globally or locally, but even simply, just even telling your friend, family, parent, your colleague about this talk and sharing with them. And then you can brainstorm ideas on how you can contribute to ecosystem restoration. And some of the things that came out from our discussion was like how we can write in to our governments or leaders about, how we can conduct these ecosystem restoration efforts or for the conservation of certain important habitats. Then there are also things like working with the universities, working with your professors who might be engineers and all that. But because of this idea that we need to help biodiversity, we need to help stop climate change together. So bring everybody in, and I think Lorraine mentioned, like, there's this diversity of opportunities, not just science, but even in policy and all that. And I think that's what we really can do to help contribute to ecosystem restoration. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carl. Let's move on to Group 6. Does Group 6 have anything to share?
Hi, I'm Yushin from Group 6. So our group came out with a few points on what we as individuals can do. So firstly is coming up with activities like, picking up rubbish and things like that, where we can educate students or even youth of our younger generations on the importance of conservation. So we can even integrate it into their curriculum, their school curriculum, because teaching them on the slides, on paper is one thing, but letting them experience, relate, and recognize the importance of, conserving our biodiversity is another. Also, we can increase our knowledge and, pick this. I'm sure many of us are, taking a bachelor or a degree in like conservation science. So we have improved our knowledge on these aspects and we can contribute better. Another point is to understand the different perspective of local communities. We talk about conservation being important. We talk about, understanding the local communities, integrating them into our decision making. So trying to empathize with them, trying to find out what are their problems and creating a win-win solution is very important as well. Yeah.
Nice. Thanks so much, Group 6. Let's move on now to Group 7.
Okay, I will be talking for Group 7. Okay, so Group 7 was interesting because we had one high schooler participant who is Fong Ling, and then we had one research associate who was John. So the feedback was quite from very different places. So the ones in pink are from Fong Ling, the ones in blue are from John. So I think of all the things that they felt they could do, I think Fong Ling's one, from her perspective as a high schooler, was to encourage like field trips for the fellow batchmates to nature areas like Sungai Buloh, for example, because she found that many of the people who went on these field trips were just her Green Club members and not the wider community of students. So having to raise awareness about all this would definitely help to get people to be aware about it at the very beginning. And then of the many suggestions that John gave, I particularly like the one in green at the bottom, which is the need to find a champion in the governmental units they are working with. So for John's case, because in the Philippines, there are hierarchies to work with, there are procedures to go through. So having someone up in those government agencies who can help you through these processes will help very, very much. And therefore, networking with your friends, with your colleagues who may be working in agencies would actually help you in the future, and you never know. And then I think because in the Philippines, John mentioned a national green program, which is a very large-scale reforestation program, but there were issues coming up like corruption, like mismanagement, and so on and so forth. So there was that shift. There's possibly that shift in focus to empowering local communities and government agencies and units so that they themselves can do that restoration on their own without having to go through all the government hierarchies. And I think a very individual thing we can do is to enrich ourselves with knowledge and information, and so that we can share this information with the community, because there is that gap between what the universities researchers are coming up with and what the community actually knows. So yeah, those are the big key points we have in our group.
All right. Thank you so much, Group 7. And last but not least, let's move on to Group 8.
So for Group 8, we have Anna from the Philippines also mentioned that solid waste segregation should begin in our homes. I guess that's because it's a current stressor in their ecosystem. And after that, we also had some Dr. Stephen, who mentioned that we should build up on our technical skills as individuals, so that coupled with our enthusiasm in ecosystem restoration, right, we can, like through carbon crediting methods, increase the income to the locals. And we can also, like through what he mentioned earlier, the drones, through learning how to use the drones, we can better prep ourselves in restoration effort. Other than that, one of our participants, Xing, also raised up the point that yes, we can volunteer, but volunteering is not financially sustainable, it's time consuming. So one way we thought we could combat that in Singapore is that you could train as a nature guide, or you could go for guided walks, and also find ways to finance yourself through the recreational value of nature. Yes, and finally, most importantly, is to learn from the experts who have been in the field for decades, because this has been a very youth-centric sharing. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Group 8. We'll now invite our moderator, Carl, to conclude today's sharing. Carl, please.
Sorry about that. I think my video went off. Okay, looks like I am experiencing technical difficulties and I can't switch on my video for some reason. So just listen to me, and I hope that you can like take what I've reflected on these 4 hours with you. So I think just firstly, I want to give my appreciation and really thank the speakers, for taking their time to, share their expertise, their learning experiences, the challenges they face, when doing all these projects. Because often, especially in this current generation of social media, we see all these successes on our social media feeds, and then sometimes we sort of forget, that there were a lot of challenges that people had to go through in order to succeed in the ecological restoration efforts. So really, props to the speakers who came down today to share some of those experiences and help really inspire the youth and all the participants in this room. And then I think also my gratitude will also go to like the organizers of today's event. When I was first invited as a moderator, I was definitely stunned by the amount of preparation and the ambition. Usually, something like this, you would think that it's organized at a very high level, but don't forget, these were organized by very, very young Singapore students and peers, and that deserves that kind of admiration to show how much potential youth can do to contribute to biodiversity conservation. And it's like one of the participants said in my room, even this symposium, right, indirectly, helps with biodiversity conservation. Okay, so enough thanking everybody and of course the participants as well for taking their time to join this. I think I also would like to conclude by saying that, this entire session, I think, has really taught us about, the diversity and complexities of ecosystem restoration. Because, it's not simply like a science where you go for ecology class, for example, in NUS LSM 2251, for all those who might know. It is more than just a lesson in university or in school. It's something that has to be applied. It's something where you need to talk to people, work with communities, work with indigenous people. And, that's how we can succeed, in solving the biodiversity crisis and climate change, because we need to not just rely on, funders or leaders. You need to empower ourselves and each other to use our potentials in the fullest, to help save our Earth. And, through all that, as the speakers has mentioned, there needs to be a lot of determination. And I think some of you might have also learned this idea of grit and resilience, because in the face of challenges, whether is it like conflicts with local communities, or whether is it with COVID-19, and during this time where there's just so much uncertainty and I would even say craziness, we have to keep hoping. At the end of the day, we are fighting for a better world, for future generations. So never give up. And then also another thing I would like to add, is, to have an open heart and mind when it comes to doing ecosystem restoration. I know it sounds very cliche, but, as the speakers have mentioned, when you're working with different people, you have to keep humble, and you never know what someone who has been living in that habitat for many generations might know about. Maybe a certain plant, certain bird that could be an indicator of that forest health. And by knowing that, that can contribute to your efforts into helping to restore that ecosystem. And then, of course, we talk about the diversity of knowledge from other sectors, the finance, economics, engineering, all this, just coming together. And I think, people have mentioned about interdisciplinary studies, etc. And then I think, just as a personal touch for me, as I said it many times already, as an aspiring plant ecologist, learn your names, because I have actually have a few people who have come up to me and asked, why are names so important? And yes, to people who are not necessarily in the sciences, it might seem ridiculous to know like the 400,000 species of plants that we have on our planet. But remember this, like every species has a story to tell, and that story to tell will aid in your efforts for biodiversity conservation. Because, for example, maybe knowing about maybe a plant such as the Compassia excelsa, a plant like that is the emergent tree inside Singapore's forest and in the region, that they they grow really fast, and they help provide shade for future species, for future shade tolerant species to grow. So things like that are important to help aid in your conservation efforts, and not just the scientific name, but even the vernacular names. So the things I mentioned about Tamak, Meranti, because that is so tied down to the cultural heritage, to the things that we eat, to the to our language. It represents so much about us, and that's why biodiversity is not just important for ecosystem services or ecosystem nature-based solutions. It's our identity, it's our symbol, it represents our countries, it represents our ethnicities. So do remember that ecosystem restoration is not just a science, but it's really tied even down to our identities. And I think to really conclude today is that as all of you, come from different walks of life, whether as scientists, students, engineers, young people just starting out your careers, whatever, retirees, or even people who are already working adults and who want to learn something new. I think I just want to say that anyone can help. And I think from a young age, as a child, growing up in the urban biodiversity and learning about from the rain tree, the sama-saman, and all the way down to becoming the Singapore Youth Biodiversity leader and co-founder of the Singapore Youth Voices for Biodiversity, I really learned that everybody from whatever sector along the way has helped me become who I am. And I really hope that you guys, the participants, will also take the challenge, to keep opening up your hearts and minds to learning on how we can solve this biodiversity crisis, not just for the wildlife, but for our species, for us as well. So I think that's all I have to share. And maybe I will get Waikit to continue.
Thank you so much, Carl. Thanks so much for being a wonderful moderator for today's session. We have almost come to the end of the symposium. We would now like to invite an advisor for our event, Dr. Sean Lam, to give the closing remarks. Dr. Sean Lam, please.
Yeah, Waikit, I hope you can hear me. So I just wanted to say a few things, and everything that I had scribbled down, it's kind of like what Dr. Steve Elliott had said. He was about to answer a question, but then Ridwan actually had said the same thing. So based on the large group sharing and Carl's remarks, I'm just going to throw out everything that I had scribbled down because it's already been mentioned. And I just wanted to say a few things. One is, my goodness, I mean, I'm a forest ecologist by profession, but boy, what a buffet of fantastic presentations of all kinds of habitats. So we started out by looking at corals with Dr. Karen Toon, and then we had peat swamps, Prof. Rahayu, and then Dr. Pasikolon spoke on freshwater. And then the second session, what did we do? We had cloud forest with Ridwan, and then we went to mangroves, and then finally to terrestrial forest. So you wanted a habitat, we pretty much got them all, or many of the significant ones. So I think what a rich offering of I'm taking a lot of time to have to digest that. I just learned so much, and I'm supposed to know all this already. I guess just a couple other things. What are some of the challenges ahead, and not just for youth, but even for those people like me who won't be around that much longer, but I'm no less concerned. And that is, the time is limited. And so how do we maximize this time? And I think we've got a lot of good technical solutions to it. So I would imagine one is that there's no need really to reinvent the wheel. There's good science everywhere, and we just need to be able to tap into it. And it's going to be these regional forums like this youth symposium on World Wildlife Day that will bring people together from across countries, from across hopefully different sectors to find synergies, to learn from each other, and then to move forward. So I think that's maybe the thing that I wanted to say is, I think the point about being young is that you have an opportunity now to meet with and interact, not with just people in your speciality, but to meet with people from all walks of life who will be fellow advocates along with you. And like I said, time's short, and we really need to restore these systems at scale if we want to avert some of the worst of the coming climate challenges, environmental challenges. I guess the last thing is, I'm just going to repeat what Group 8 said about what Steve Elliott said was, the restoration of habitats is great, but at the local community level, how can it be worth people's time and energy? It's somehow got to pay for itself, or it's somehow got to translate into livelihoods for people. And that's going to be a big challenge. And so that's where we, as people who are interested in the technical aspect of restoration, run into fundamental challenge, which is how do we reach across outside of this realm of science, where we have some control over how we can conduct these experiments and improve the methods to actually convince others that it's not only good to do, but they can help us find the solutions to make it workable at all different levels. Last thing I wanted to say was, other than that, I come out of here really fired up to do something now. I know from seeing what was happening behind the scenes over the past few weeks, the enormous amount of work that went into it. And I just want to thank once again the organizing committee and the advisors and the people, my colleagues at the National Parks Board in Singapore, for having the vision and also for putting in the hours to make this possible. And lastly, that we had so many participants from not just Singapore, from beyond. I hope this event can grow larger, can bring networks of people together, and can really ignite the interests and the passion of people outside the nature community to really make this something that's part of our everyday lives, not just for you and me, but for everyone around us. Once again, thank you everybody for making this such a wonderful event. It was such a pleasure and a privilege to be here. Thank you, Waikit, and everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sean Lam. Thanks so much for your guidance over the past months. This event would not have been possible without the following individuals as well, from our talented artists to our outstanding moderator, facilitators, and knowledgeable speakers. On behalf of my team, I would like to thank you all from the bottom of my heart because you made this event possible. Lastly, please scan the QR code to complete the feedback survey required for your certificate of participation. In addition, you will also receive a post-symposium report in a week, and remember to follow us on Instagram to keep in touch. We have now come to the end of the World Wildlife Day Regional Youth Symposium 2022. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us learning about the various ecosystems and strategies utilized to restore these habitats. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.